close by. Anyway, okay, a little review from last year. I know a lot of you were not here last year, so I'll do a quick review and get in some new material. Keep in mind that when you're filling out the TDS, and you also use the AVID form, right? The agent. Okay. The biggest mistake that agents make, and year after year, this is my 20th year talking about it, and there's been no change, is the use of adjectives when you're filling out a disclosure form. So the best thing to do, first step to just try to stay out of court, is just do not use adjectives. And I'll give you some examples of how easy it is to use them without even thinking about it. So small, large, fair, poor, major, minor, even colors like black mold, white mold, purple, green, red, color of anything. The problem is that these words are all opinions, and opinions are always debatable, and you just don't want to debate anybody in court. It's not a level playing field. The deck is stacked against you. They have expert witnesses that make their living in court, and they're out to get you. So you want to get rid of the ammunition in advance so they can't use it against you later. A nice technique when it comes to numbers. Some agents are really particular, overly particular. They're doing their visual inspection, they're looking around, and they notice like the hairline cracks, which we kind of see all over in Southern California in homes. But they actually will like list them out on the Avid form. And they'll have like 9 cracks listed. And then a picky buyer moves in and calls up and says, you know, I found a 10th crack that you missed, or something like that. So a great technique to remove that potential is to use the word some, S-O-M-E, some. Some cracks noted at interior walls. It's a nice collective, one fell swoop catch-all. So if that picky buyer finds that 10th, 11th, 12th crack, it's one of the some, or if you missed one or whatever, so you don't have to worry about it. I'm thinking of the word water here in terms of like water stain. Let's say this is a dining room, and since we have like a stain right here. Thank you very much for providing this. Maybe, let's say it wasn't quite so big, whatever, maybe half the size. And a dining room table there, I'm looking around, I see that. Think, well, maybe like small water stain might be the first thing that comes to mind. Well, I don't want to use the word small because that's an adjective, so that's gone. I actually don't know if it's from water. It could be from champagne. Somebody popped a cork, hit the ceiling. Something stored in the attic that's leaking. Don't know, don't need to know, don't care to know. And one of the good things about disclosure, and there aren't a lot of great things about it, but one good thing is that I don't need to analyze or diagnose anything for the client. I don't have to figure anything out for them. All I need to do is point things out. So as soon as I have drawn their attention to that stain, and that's all, I am completely done with my fiduciary, moral, ethical, and every other kind of obligation I may have to the client. Now they know about it, and it's up to them to pursue it further if they want to. So we go from small water stain to just stain or whatever, and that's why we don't want to use a word like mold or mildew, because to get to a word like mold or mildew, you've got to take at least a couple of steps, like, hey, there's a stain. That's okay because I'm pointing it out. But when I go, you know, it looks like mold, that's not okay because now I'm figuring it out, and I don't want to cross that threshold of figuring things out. So the best words for what I might perceive, but never really know, but might perceive to be mold or mildew, are always generic words: stain, spot, discoloration. And by the way, on the topic of mold, you know, mold has been around like forever. It's, you know, mentioned in the book of Leviticus in the Bible, and it goes way back. It's just been no change with mold. What has changed is people's perception to it. And so about, I guess, 12, 15 years ago, after really never being significant in real estate, it became the biggest disclosure issue we've ever seen in terms of lawsuits. Then it's kind of died down, and it's not now starting to revive. Mold isn't reviving, it's just our perception towards it and attorneys' involvement in it, so we have to be really careful about that. So you never want to use a word like mold, mildew, or anything, fungus or whatever, because it is a bit of a analysis to get there. Any word that comes before the word crack is a bad word, so keep that in mind. So, the most common offenders in disclosure, and there are a lot of them: settling crack, surface crack, hairline crack, cosmetic crack. This is bad too, this is really bad, know that. Expansive crack, superficial crack. The other day I saw it was stress crack. I mean, there's all kinds of words we can put in front of the word crack. And let me tell you, if it ever gets to court, you'll never be able to defend any word you put before the word crack. If you say it's an expansive crack, they will bring in a geologist to debate you, and that guy's making $500 or $600 an hour. with the other attorney, the enemy attorney, so to speak, and this guy's written books on crackology or whatever the topic is, I don't know, and they'll just run you ragged. And it can't happen to you if you just don't write the word down. So it's just a crack. So I write down 3 large settling cracks noted near mold stained above fireplace. Everything wrong here, but exaggerating to make a point. Another great technique, and it's free of charge. You don't have to buy an app or a download software or whatever to do this, and it takes about a minute. You're at the property, you're doing your visual inspection, and you're going to write something down that's just a few words. Go ahead and write it down right there at the property. But if it's going to be a little more lengthy, like this or longer, write it down on a separate piece of paper, and then later on, identify the words that don't really actually have to be there. And once you've identified them, remove them. And then whatever you have left over, put that onto the Avid form. And in a minute, it's about as liability-free as you can get. So that's a great technique as well. Most of the time, at least in California, and states vary, and even varies, I do what I'm doing here all over California, kind of equally dispersed, Central Valley, Bay Area, whatever. So there are some regional differences, but usually we do not tell the client or suggest to the client what they ought to do about something. We might say there's a stain, not there's a stain, and if I were you, I'd have it checked out, or I'd have a roofer or a plumber or a whatever. I just tell them that there's a stain. There can be exceptions to the rule, and sometimes offices will differ on this. So let's say it's a high-end property, it's up on a slope, there maybe been some soils issues, and I notice just a heck of a lot of cracks in the tile floors and out by the pool. It just kind of looks suspicious or whatever. Don't know what's going on. Don't need to know what's going on. Just have no need to know, because I'm not going to figure anything out. But I am concerned, and I'm concerned on behalf of my client. So would it hurt to mention some cracks and throw in there they may want to have a structural engineer take a look? It's like a lot of us look at that and think, well, there's no downside to doing that. They don't have to, but they can, and I'm making the suggestion. Down in my neck of the woods in San Diego, this is actually in La Jolla, about 5 or 6 years ago, this occurred in the middle of the night, kind of a sinkhole landslide sort of thing. Nobody obviously predicted this. Nobody knew it was going to happen. But about a year before it occurred, the County of San Diego, their engineering department, put out a notice to the residents in that area that something adverse was going on. Swimming pools were cracking in half and trees popping out of the ground and all kinds of things. Just did not know what was happening. So they put out a notice to the residents. If you see anything happening on your property that looks suspicious or odd, let us know. So let's say I was doing a deal on one of the properties in the background here 6 months before this happened. And I just noticed a heck of a lot of sort of cracking, red flags, that sort of thing. So I mentioned that there are some cracks. I throw in there they may want to get a structural engineer. Well, as you can tell from this picture, the problem in the neighborhood, it may not be the only problem, but the big problem is a soils issue. It's about dirt, it's about earth, it's a landslide, it's a sinkhole. So the client or the buyer probably needs to have a soils engineer take a look at it. They may need other people too, like structural engineers, but they at least need a soils engineer. But I just told them to get the structural engineer. That was kind of my guess, and I'm not supposed to guess either. So they spent $5,000 on this report, which is easy to get to on especially a bigger property. And the engineer comes back to them and says, can't find anything wrong structurally. It looks like a really well-built home. Something's going on here, but I don't think it's structure. So you probably need to get a soils engineer now for like another $5,000. Now my client's upset with me. Why'd you tell me to get this other guy when I should have gotten somebody else? So if you're ever going to make a suggestion, that's a big if, because some folks like it and some don't, management-wise. It's always best to stay generic, like qualified specialist, appropriate professional, expert, something like that. Much better way to go. And we don't want to use superlative words. I'll give you a list in a second here. Either for disclosure, the negatives that we caution a buyer about, like on the Avid form, or advertising, the good things that we might put in a flyer or whatever. And these are words that cover every single square foot of the entire property. And really nothing does. The biggest problem here is in advertising, more than disclosure, but it happens in both. Hardwood floors throughout house, for example. There's probably going to be a laundry room, a kitchen, bathroom where they don't have hardwood floors. So they don't really have them throughout, so it's not a correct thing to say. If the wood is, especially older properties that have never been remodeled, sometimes the wood is pine, and pine is not a hardwood, it's a softwood. And you're not going to write down softwood floors in living room and dining room. Bamboo flooring, which is popular in some places, not so much in others. Is bamboo wood? No, bamboo's not wood at all. It's grass, or reed, the reed family, but it's not grass. It's not wood at all. So we can't call that a wood floor. Or the newer stuff, you look at it, some of the newer products, it's kind of hard to tell. They do such a good job. Like, is it laminate? Is it pergo? What is this composite? What is this made out of? If you do not know, the answer is simple. And the answer is beautiful floors, shiny floors, floors included with house. No, I'm kidding. Magnificent flooring. When they move in, they may not think the flooring is all that magnificent, but they will not sue you over the word magnificent. Like cause of action, lack of magnificence or something. It just doesn't happen. But totally, completely, totally remodeled kitchen just becomes beautifully remodeled kitchen. Let me tell you, in the California courtroom, you cannot totally remodel a mailbox. Can't be done. There's going to be something left unattended to. So just pick any one. Completely refurbished master bath becomes charming, wonderful, delightful, incredible, terrific, and then we don't get into any trouble with these words. People just don't sue over them. And by the way, people can even go after us in small claims court for this sort of thing. Does anybody know how much small claims court goes up to these days? It was $5,000 for a long time, then it was $7,500 for a while. Now it's $10,000 in California. And the rules of evidence are very, very minimal. And those small claims courtrooms are biased towards the buyer and seller more than us. So, you know, got to be careful about this stuff. Some TDS and AVID tips. Now, I know you mentioned using the AVID here, and that's great. Kind of has developed into the standard of care. But keep in mind that the AVID is an optional form. It may be mandatory here, and that's great. But it's not state mandatory. It's a company mandatory form, and it is mandatory in most places. So, and that's a good thing. But the mandatory form is the TDS for most transactions, you know, REOs and some other exemptions. So our marching orders on how to fill out this, how to fill out the AVID form, how to have a conversation with the client, write them an email, a letter, anything regarding disclosure always comes from this form. So down here on the buyer side, everything we need to do to fill out this, the AVID, anything, is based on one activity. It's called a visual inspection, just looking around, kind of hands in the pocket, very somewhat casual, focused but casual, doesn't take too long. That means it does not include talking to neighbors. It does not include running down to City Hall and pulling permits for people. It's just looking around the subject property. Speaking of neighbors, keep in mind that there is no upside for you to ever have a conversation with a neighbor. None. As a matter of fact, if you see one approaching you and you can get away from them. Hide. You know, hide in the house or something. Because if they tell you a story about the property and it's the hearsay stuff, you are contaminated. You're in a lose-lose situation. If it's true, the story, and you do not disclose it, you can get in trouble for that. If it's not true, and you think it might be, and you disclose it and maybe lose the buyer and it causes a big problem, you're in trouble for that too. So the way to stay out of trouble, the best way on hearsay, is to never hear the hearsay. Just stay away from it if you can. Up here, a little bit more information than here. We have the visual inspection and also this inquiry of the seller. They really like it in court on the listing side when we have engaged our sellers. Anything you've been meaning to fix, anything I wouldn't know about, I don't live here 24 hours a day. You know, have a conversation with them. You can get some information from them that way. I think the reason why they invented the AVID form was something like this. This agent just kept going around and down and around the back and ran out of room. More room on the AVID form. Okay, the three things that get us in the most trouble in the last few years since this AVID form was introduced. The first one is when we disclose too much. We have what TMI, too much information. The light bulb needs to be replaced in the nail holes, and it just kind of goes on. And the problem with that is, well, it's kind of a paradox. We go into, let's say, the dining room, we look around, dining room looks okay, don't see anything wrong. I kind of have to put something on the form, I think. So I start looking for spider webs or something to write down. And then I end up with too much information, and they use that against me to raise my standard of care, saying if you're that picky in the dining room, we'll expect you to be equally picky and have as much detail in the laundry room and the hallways and is usually not the case. So that backfires. The second mistake is the opposite, disclosing too little. And that's where the only thing that we have on the entire disclosure document is just, I recommend the home be professionally inspected. Now, I think it's a good thing to recommend, but a recommendation is not a disclosure. It's a suggestion, it's advice. It's not a comment on the condition of the home. So this makes it look like we never even got out of our car. Now, let me just back up. One of the good things about this, and one of our other sponsors, Kenny, who will talk in a minute in the home, with the Elite Home Inspections, it uses the word professional, and that's a really good word to use when you do write this down. Keep in mind, you never want to write down, I recommend you get a licensed home inspector, and that's because there aren't any. California does not license them. There's no licensing for it. So professional or qualified is a much better way to go. Okay, so that's not good. And so we had too much, too little. The third is when we disclose information incorrectly. The information may be correct, it's just on the wrong form. So we got the color of the walls, the square footage of the home, whatever, and then it just doesn't belong on a transfer disclosure statement or an AVID form, and that makes it look like we have no idea what we're doing. So when we do it just right, which is what our attorney of course likes, we have got a stain here, a crack there, something wrong with the door, whatever. Kind of a middle approach. It demonstrates that we're competent, professional, and they can keep that theme going throughout the litigation process. Now, a couple of other things we have to be careful of. What is, since I was here last year, we have a relatively new option, see attached AVID form. I'll get to that in a second. That's a really good addition to this, if it's done right. The second option now, agent notes no items for disclosure. Good idea never to check that off. I mentioned I've been doing this 20 years. I talk about this topic far more than anybody else in California have for a long time. I have never heard of one single case or instance in 2 decades where checking that off has ever helped anybody. I don't know why they have it on the form. It's a good thing to avoid. This agent has written down on the TDS, home is in fair condition. And the problem here, for many problems with it, but the main one is that it's a compliment. It's not a really big compliment, but it is kind of on the positive side of the ledger, so to speak. And we don't want to write down anything positive on a disclosure document. That's for advertising. Disclosure forms, for our part of them, are only for negatives. Here's how easy it is to do this by mistake. We can write down like normal wear and tear observed. It's good to be normal, I guess. So that's a compliment. And we do not want to write anything down complimentary. That's for advertising. Disclosure is about things that are wrong or look like they could be wrong. So I have to be careful with that. The only thing this agent has written down on the entire AVID form is just, I agree with what the seller stated on the TDS. So, not good. What typically happens here, where this scenario plays out, is I'm looking around the property, I'm on the listing site, I see just one heck of a big crack in the wall. I think, wow, that looks bad. Whether it is or not, don't need to know, but I'm going to disclose it. Then I pick up the TDS from my sellers and I think, oh, they did a great job. They checked off all the boxes. They mentioned this and other things. I agree with everything that they wrote down. So I put that on my AVID form. That's all I put down. So I end up in court over something. It may not be this, but something else perhaps. So what an attorney will probably do to me is they'll have a photo for the jury. They'll have a photograph of this crack. They'll have my AVID form, which doesn't have very much on it. I'm sitting on the stand, and the jury's over there, and the attorney says, you know, this agent here couldn't even find this crack. Walked right by it. Is so inept, so bad at what he does, he didn't even see it. And so I'm there, I'm saying, no, I saw it. It's just that if you look at the TDS here, my seller's right down here, and they'll just interrupt me and say, oh, so your sellers are doing your job for you? Are you like slacking off somewhere else and somebody else is picking up the slack for you? It never plays out well, because when I first saw that crack, I thought, you know, I better mention that. So my decision to mention it was just made. And if the termite guy sees it and discloses it, the home inspector will, the appraiser and 10 other people do. Good for them, just isn't good for me, because I have my own personal obligation to disclose. And when I disclose it, I'm not repeating what somebody else has said. I'm just doing it on my own for the first time properly. So got to be careful about that. And I don't know if I had this last year or not, but this is just section 2. Only what I'll say in the next 60 seconds relates only to section 2. If you look at this carefully, some of the boxes have check marks, some X's, handwriting, typing. It's kind of a mixed bag. And it gives the impression, or will give the impression to an attorney who's looking at it carefully, and they do look at it carefully, that more than one person has had their hands on this. And that's fine as long as the other person was not you. One of the big rules for disclosure is that our writing instrument, our pen, can never touch any part of section 2. We can give our seller advice verbally, have to be limited, careful and all that, but just no pen to the page. That includes, here are the big 3 attempts, and none of them work to try to get us out of court when we've done this. Your Honor, my sellers are out of town, doesn't work. They're disabled, doesn't work. They don't speak English, doesn't work. The English thing definitely does not work. So who can do it? There are approximately 7 billion people on the planet, and any one of them but you, almost. More realistically, the sellers, if they're able, the sellers' neighbors, caregivers, relatives, friends, it just is not supposed to be us. Okay, some funny ones I have found along the trail. Got here, a couple of them, I think. Crack stains, this place has it all. Not a good thing to write down. It's very honest, but not a good thing to write down. This old house has all the problems an old house like this should have. It's like Robert Frost was involved in this, or Kipling or somebody. Kind of poetic. And then I think I have one more here. Yeah, like this. Could be worse. I like that a lot. This agent goes to court. I told you it could be worse. I told you that. Okay, let me do a couple here, and then we'll hear from Kenny. Back to the AVID form. A question I get a lot is, let's say you're in the living room, and you can't find anything wrong in the living room. You're thinking, looks okay to me. Well, if I leave it blank, it kind of looks like maybe I forgot to go there, so I don't want to leave it blank. Don't want to write down that there's nothing wrong, because you don't know there's nothing wrong. You're not pulling up carpet and moving furniture and paintings off the walls. You don't want to say that. Same reason you don't want to say that everything is okay. Some agents write down NA are not applicable. More recently, that's been a popular thing to write down. And after being coached by their attorney, buyers come into court and they say, oh, I thought you meant that the living room was not applicable, like living room, den, family room. I got all confused. And the agent's sitting there saying, no, there's a living room. It's the disclosures that are not applicable, and everybody starts this big argument. So two trends that I see out there, and I'll recommend one of the two myself, and then check them out here. One is a check mark to signify I was there, didn't forget to go there, but didn't see anything really worth mentioning. And the one that I like the best, that is gaining in popularity and is definitely the most popular now, is just nothing noted. Keep in mind, the big point here is that nothing noted is very different than nothing wrong. Nothing wrong means I have x-ray vision, I'm psychic, I can have all these special powers. Nothing noted just means within my limited scope of care, I did not see anything worth mentioning. And I also did go to the room. I didn't forget about it. Now back to the relatively new option, see attached AVID form. And of course, always check out what I say with management here. But the problem that agents are experiencing in litigation now is that some of them write a little bit of a disclosure on the TDS, they run out of room, and they finish up the rest on the AVID form. And after rehearsing, this is like a 3-act play when it gets to court. After rehearsing this with their attorney, buyers go into court and they say, you mean there was more to read? I only looked at this. I didn't know I was supposed to go to some other form, and I never got the information, so that can backfire. Or we write down C addendum, and the buyers, having been coached, say, what addendum? There's like 5 addendums. I got all, they were saying they got confused about something. So my suggestions are, do not write any disclosures on your portion of the TDS. Do not write C addendum. Do check off the AVID box. That's what it's there for now, and it's a great addition. And when we do it that way, this way, they are out of excuses. There's nothing for them to say, nowhere for them to hide. There's nothing for them to read. If they want the results of your limited visual inspection, there's not a little bit here, a little bit somewhere else, a reference to a random addendum. There's nothing. So they're forced to look here to the option, see attached, AVID form, and that's where we put all our results. And that's using it correctly, and I suggest that. A couple other things here. Cell service, I'm getting a lot of questions about that. You know, about 50% of buyers now in the state of California do not get the good old standard reliable kitchen wall home phone setup. They're relying exclusively on cell phones for business and personal use. So let's say you're at the property and you just can't make a call, or the buyer's there, can't get a call, whatever, and it's just kind of known lousy cell service, maybe with T-Mobile, Verizon, or every carrier provider, whatever. You know, there's nothing in your standard of care that says you have to check this out. It's not part of your job. But you don't want to have a post-close of escrow hassle either. If half of buyers now stand a chance of having a problem with this, that's a pretty hefty percentage. So even though we have no responsibility, if it's a factor, not a bad idea to have a conversation with the client. And if you have a conversation, you always want to document that in the file. You know, there's a saying that in legal circles that if you lose a case, you lose, and if you win a case, you lose. It's just bad to be sued. So if you can prevent something, have a discussion. So if they're on Verizon and that doesn't work well, they can go to another carrier and get it all worked out before they actually move in the home, and then you don't have to worry about it later. Some issues coming up with texting, quite a few now in court, where we're active with texting during a transaction, and buyers go into court. They say, I never got the information that you say I got or should have received. And the agent said, I sent you like 3 text messages. And all the buyer has to say, it could be the seller here too, I never got it. And it's been, it's evaporated into cyberspace oblivion. Then it's their word against our word, not a good scenario for us. So whether it is by email like I have here, or an engraved stone tablet or anything in between, however you memorialize it or document it in the file, it's a good idea. If the text message is, let's meet at Denny's for breakfast, let that one go. But if it's something of substance, you want to make it part of the file. Now, a lot of us have these, really neat phones now, and they can do all kinds of things. And they all don't do the same things, but I do know that some agents have the ability on their phone. They do a text message, they take a picture of that message, and they email it to their file, to themselves, to the client, and so it becomes part of the file. And not everybody has that equipment or whatever, or that feature, but if you do, that's something you may want to think about. And then social media, have to be careful with this, Facebook, YouTube, whatever. Kind of a new world out there with disclosure. These sites, these here and others, a lot of others, are what's referred to as in the public domain. And the legal doctrine, as this has been explained to me, or the wording or the verbiage, is that there is, quote, no expectation of privacy, end of quote, at these sites. So anybody can go to the information that you have posted on your site. They can cut and paste it. They can put it on television, in a movie, on a billboard, or in court, because there's no expectation that it's confidential. That includes blogging. There was a case out in the desert, Palm Desert or Rancho Mirage area, where the agent was being sued. He had a lender, associate, or partner. A prospective buyer was suing both of them for like alleged discrimination, and the opposing attorney found where this agent had blogged, I would like to see all low credit score buyers sent to an abandoned desert island. So in court, the agent's sitting there, the attorney puts that up behind him. He says, would you turn around and read that? He goes, all right, I would like to see all low credit scores. He realized when he was reading it that he had blogged it. So he said, did you actually blog that? And he said, I'm sorry to say I did. He felt like, crawling under the table and hiding. So I like to say when you're at the keyboard on one of these sites, pretend like whatever you're putting out there is being projected onto the screen in front of a courtroom, because that's where it may end up. A little twist on this that is just developing has to do with dating sites like Match.com, eHarmony, and some others. No expectation of privacy. Anybody that joins one of these groups can go to your profile and read it if you're on it. There's been one case I know of so far up in the Bay Area where an agent was being sued for a variety of things, and he was on Match.com, and somehow the attorney found that out, the opposing attorney, got a membership, went to his page, his profile. He had the standard, I like long walks on the beach, and I'm making good money in real estate, though I have no idea what I'm doing. Up on the screen, would you turn around and read this? He read it. Is that in your profile? Yes, it is. What do you mean you have no idea? And it was downhill from there, so not good. So we have to be careful. I've got about 10 more minutes before I do a little Q&A thing. Kenny's here with Elite Home Inspections. You want to say a few words?
Thanks, Bob. Hey, how are you guys? Hey. Happy Monday. Nice to see everybody. It's been a while since I've seen you all. First thing I want to do is tell you all thank you very much. We're doing about 10 inspections a month with C21 Masters. That's pretty good, so thank you very, very much. Just to update you what's going on, it's our 28th year in the inspection business. Again, we did over about 12,000 inspections last year. We're exceeding that again this year. Our business is growing. And how do we do that? And I really want to just remind you of the two things that are very, very important. Obviously, the reason we go out and do an inspection is to be thorough, but don't kill your deal, right? Please don't kill my deal. But what's more important than that, and the reason why we're here today, is don't go to court. Let's keep you out of court. And those are the two things that we achieve, year in and year out with our business. So if you didn't get one of my presentation folders, I'm going to leave one for you. Inside there's a copy of my E&O insurance. I know a lot of you in here have heard me say it before, but I like to repeat it. And of course you heard Bob say that there's no such thing as a licensed home inspector in California. We're still unregulated. That's about to change, we think. We're talking with actually Sacramento now, and I'll let Neil know the minute that comes about and what that means for